public school to 5th grade. Many times I wanted to leave and never knew where to go. I remember being 15 and wanting to leave and walking down the road and looking at the high school where I was supposed to be going to school and just wanting to be part of this other world that I knew nothing about. So once I became a full adult and 28 years old and my brain was fully developed and I realized I was being duped by this very devious religion, I left with my 5 children and I went to college and got a degree and then protested and have been a voice for women and children in polygamy ever since. So I'm glad to be here today. We have a very large polygamous population in Colorado that a lot of you may not be aware of. Hopefully you leave today with more information if you ever have to interface with a victim or intervene for women and children or a young boy who's thrown out of the community. You may have more information today to manage those cases and successfully prosecute crimes. And I just want to say, we're going to dig deeper, Sam and I, at 2 o'clock in this very same room, and talk more about how to prosecute cases within polygamy successfully. So I just want to quickly add a disclaimer that the people practicing polygamy are not LDS Mormons. They are what they like to call themselves is Fundamentalist Mormons, but that they went, they were like renegades that split off the Mormon Church and kept polygamy, the practice of polygamy, going when the Mormon Church gave it up. So I just want to make sure that the audience is aware. We're not talking about the Mormon Church today. We're talking about the Fundamentalists who still practice polygamy. So Sam, do you have your mic on?
Yes.
Do you want to stand up so when
I think so.
When you start, you're part of this too. Get up here. Okay. So many people wonder why women practice polygamy and why don't they leave their husbands, and many believe that maybe they're just uninformed, stupid women from Utah for some reason. They just stay and put up with that. But they actually are held by Scripture that threatens them, that if they don't conform to polygamy, they will be destroyed by God. And their husbands hold the priesthood, which is the power to act for God. And so I don't believe that anyone who's living polygamy is participating as free-minded, consenting adults. And this is one of their laws, is the law of Sarah. Now, when my marriage was arranged when I was 18, we did a special marriage handshake, and I was given to my husband. But I also had to make a covenant that day, and the covenant was that I would give another woman to him in marriage, and that I would take her hand and I would place her hand in his, and that was the law of Sarah. The history of polygamy began back in the 1800s, and it became doctrine. It was brought over to the Utah Territory, and Brigham Young practiced it. He had at least 27 wives, maybe more than that. Pretty soon the federal authorities became aware of it, and they were like, you cannot be practicing a theocracy separate of the United States, which is what they had in the Utah Territory. And so in order to gain statehood, they had to give up polygamy. And so that's where the mainstream Mormon Church gave it up, and then the Fundamentalists took it underground in this 8-hour meeting in which one of the church leaders, John Taylor, appointed other men to perform marriages and to make sure that not 1 year went by in which a child wasn't born in polygamy. So every time a legal case has come up before the Supreme Court, they have always ruled that it's illegal. It's illegal in all 50 states, and it's a felony.
It's also illegal federally as well. So it's not just a passing thing or something that's new. It began with a case called the Reynolds case in the.
Can you guys hear Sam?
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. It started with a case called the Reynolds case, which made polygamy illegal federally. That was the beginning of it.
then the federal agents started cracking down on polygamy, and in the 40s my grandfather was arrested and was in prison because he had 4 wives and some 32 children, and he wouldn't sign the prison manifesto to promise that he wouldn't cohabitate with the other women that weren't legal wives, and so he stayed in prison for 4 years, and then they finally released him. Then again in 1953, this was a pretty famous raid of the town of Short Creek, which is located on the Utah-Arizona border. At that time, it's the only time that an entire community was raided by peace officers, and they did it at 4 in the morning under a lunar eclipse, so it was very dark, and they went into each of the houses, and they shone a flashlight in and arrested the men for unlawful cohabitation, took the women and children into custody, and took them to Flagstaff, Arizona for rehabilitation. And this really backfired on Governor Pyle, and he lost his political career over that, and it's been like a warning to anyone else in the rest of history to just leave them alone. They do things differently down there, and it's been a hands-off approach for decades in which just the most atrocious crimes have been able to be committed and power abused in just ways that you cannot even fathom.
Life magazine did a big spread on this raid in 1953 and pictured women having their babies jerked away from them and crying, and just portrayed it as these huge atrocities, and it brought a lot of sympathy from the world. I mean, that spread in Life magazine was something that just caused people to feel like these poor Mormon polygamists were being persecuted, and that's something that they continue to use today. Clear back from 1953, they learned from that.
They learned how to use the media, and the media has now been contributing to the abuse of the children in this community. My parents were featured in Life magazine in 1953, and they made it look pretty good and benign. But in your handouts is Governor Pyle's own words on why he raided that community. And he was saying that this is a wicked community filled with men who believe that every young girl by the age of 15 should be handed over to men of all ages to do nothing but give birth to children. And that if we didn't step up, just for human sake, that this would grow into a monstrous problem. If you attend our session at 2 o'clock, you'll hear just how monstrous it got. So this is Short Creek, Arizona, and now it's Colorado City. It's on the Utah-Arizona border. They located there deliberately so that they could jump state lines and confuse jurisdiction for prosecuting crimes. And after the raid in 1953, the leader then was, we called him Uncle Roy. And Uncle Roy set up the law of placing. And this is when arranged marriages began. And it was under this idea that young girls could be swayed by their own feelings for men, and that they might be with a man who is not righteous or could take them to heaven, because they don't believe that a woman can go to heaven by herself. She needs a righteous man to take her to heaven. So they suddenly began arranging marriages of very young girls. I knew of a 12-year-old that was forced to marry her stepfather while I was in there, and that was 21 years ago. Statutory rape was status quo. I didn't even know about statutory rape laws till I was in my 30s, because that was what was going on all around me. I didn't know there was an elephant in the room.
A lot of people believe now that underage marriage is something that was kind of instituted lately with Warren Jeffs, and it's something that has gone on since the Fundamentalists organized. It's kind of a reward system, a very quiet, underground reward system in the Fundamentalist movement.
Yes, if you stay in good standing with the leader, and you hand over your daughters to have their marriages arranged, then you will get young wives yourself. And young girls have become the currency in this polygamous sect. I'm going to just go over briefly where they're located. Sam's going to talk about this.
Caliente, Nevada is a place where one of the church elders, Merrill Jessup, bought this little hotel out in the middle of nowhere. I don't know if any of you know where Caliente, Nevada is. That's because it's out in the middle of nowhere. It is a place that they bought that they felt they could bring young girls to and perform underage marriages. They thought that by bringing them from Short Creek, which is right on the Utah-Arizona border, and brought them to this place where there's more favorable laws, marriage laws, that they could hide it and do it better. One of the people who ran this hotel was one of Merrill Jessup's wives, Carolyn Jessup, and Carolyn wrote a book called Escape that kind of talks about her life and some of the things she did there. But caravans of young girls and men would arrive at that hotel, and right there on the far right, or I guess left, right, the other way, the other way. No, the other way.
Oh,
There you go.
Okay.
Only the next one over.
Oh, there you
go. Right there.
I'm a slow learner.
That's room 15, and that's where they would perform the marriages at. The prophet Warren Jeffs or Roland Jeffs would be in there, and they just bring in one girl at a time, perform the marriage, they'd be with the husband, and they'd take off from there. So it was a place specifically for performing underage marriages.
Here we go with our Colorado properties. So they're in Custer and Fremont County, and they're up in Westcliff. And I went out there myself and took these pictures. The gated property there is monitored by surveillance cameras. So anyone approaching, they will know. Anyone trying to leave, they'll know. They're very, very isolated now, more than they've ever been. People in the community report and send me emails and updates and said that if the women are outside of this property, they have a man with them. They saw him in Walmart, and they wanted to just hand him a phone number, like, we care, here, you know. And yet there was no way, because they're constantly monitored by either a man chaperoning them or the surveillance cameras. So they're also in Mancos. There's been a lot of movement from other locations to Colorado. And, oh, you can go ahead and share. You've got lots of information on
Mancos, in fact, I do have a lot of information on it right now. There's a lot of activity there right now. There's been a lot of women and children seen there. There's an extraordinary amount of building that's going on out there right now, as is the case with many of the FLDS properties around the country. It's also going on in North Dakota and New Mexico and some of the other places. Mancos is a spot that they've been left relatively alone. They feel very comfortable there. They don't feel like that their space is going to get invaded. It's completely surrounded by national forest, and they feel very safe and secure there. Consequently, Warren Jeffs has started from prison, mind you. He's in prison right now, bringing in more children to that Mancos property. So it's starting to grow, and things are starting to happen, and we're trying to figure out what exactly that is.
And they also bought lumber and cement and supplies from local businesses. So, you know what? Business is up with the Polygamous in town. People are making money.
And that does make a lot of the townspeople more tolerant. This is El Dorado, Texas. When I first started working on this, it was when this property was found. It was originally just like 3 of these kind of, they call them H-homes back there. Over the past 7-8 years, it's grown into a city. They have a huge temple there, which is shown down at the bottom. Warren, the fundamentalists for many years didn't feel that they needed a temple. That was something that would come during the millennium. And all of a sudden, Warren Jeffs decided that they needed a temple. as it turns out, it was a place for him to solemnize his marriages with young girls and perform these really bizarre rituals. I won't go into all those right now. It kind of takes a while, but that is a place that was designed and built and put up specifically for performing sexual acts and on young children. Over on the far end over here is Rule and Jeff's. These are just a couple of his wives, and it kind of illustrates how it kind of started going. The girl shown here is one of Warren's victims that he was prosecuted for in Texas. She was 12 years old and 24 days old when she was married to Warren Jeffs. That ceremony was witnessed by several of Warren's hierarchy, and actually performed by some of his hierarchy. And also their mothers were there, and actually took them by the hand and gave them to these old lechers.
Just say it how it is.
And so this is one of the women. This is the one that Warren Jeffs received a sentence of life plus 20 years in Texas. She was the 20 years on the life sentence. This is a case that we began. This is probably the first civil case. It was an effort to try and bring public awareness to the problems going on in Short Creek. It became known in the media as the Lost Boys case. Those are our clients, all those guys up the side of the rail there. All good guys. They didn't want to go after their parents. They didn't want to go after their family, but they wanted to do something. And this lawsuit was the way of doing it. So we filed a case charging the FLDS Church, Warren Jeffs, and the United Effort Plan Trust with racketeering under the Utah version of the Federal RICO Act. And we were successful in that case. However, it still goes on. I mean, the FLDS are very good at adapting, hiding resources, forming new companies. They're basically an organized crime organization. They do it very, very well. So that was kind of our beginning of trying to do something and bring public awareness about the FLDS. And these young guys are just, they're taken at a very young age, usually around 8 years old, put on work crews, sent out to work, and I mean from sunup to sundown. They work hard, and they burn them out, and then they discard them. Because in any polygamous group, you have to have a lot more hens than roosters. And so you have to do something mathematically about these young guys that are coming up that become a challenge to the younger girls, the brides. And so they find ways of getting rid of them. Many of these guys, most of these guys, were just basically kicked off alongside the road and told by their parents, their father, don't call us, don't write us. If you try to write us, we'll throw your letters away. We won't answer your calls. You're no longer welcome here. And that is kind of the premise of the documentary Sons of Perdition, if you ever get a chance to watch that. And so it was a way of trying to help and bring awareness to these guys' plight, not just the girls, but the guys.
Anywhere from like 13 to 17 years old, they just leave with a backpack, dropped off on the side of the road. The parents are never held accountable. There's no criminal charges for abandoning their children. There's no child welfare investigation. And they don't have to pay for any care for them from then on. Now, you and I could never do that with our children, or we would be accountable to a system. And that's where this is really lacking, and that's why we continue to speak, is for children.
And we have brought that to agencies and said, okay, what can we do to get help for these guys? And the answer is, they have to commit a crime. Then we can help them. Consequently, many of them turn into criminals.
They're in flop houses, they're drinking, they don't know how to cope, so, there's drug use and...
They call them butt huts because they have to step over everybody's butts to get across the floor. I mean, they're literally sleeping all over the floor.
Yeah.
When Warren Jeffs first took power, in an effort to kind of solidify his power, he got up in a priesthood meeting and told 20 men that they were no longer worthy priesthood holders, that they needed to go home and tell their wives and their children that they were no longer worthy priesthood holders, and that they needed to go to a new man. Now that's how it works there. There's no due process. There's no divorce. When you're found in disfavor, Warren tells them you're no longer welcome. There's no reason given. And the really sad part of it is most of the men do it. These 20 men that were picked out of the congregation were told to stand up and vote themselves out of the group. And they did it. And then they went home and they told their wives they're no longer worthy. They needed to go to another man. They told their children that they were no longer their father, that whoever their mother was reassigned to was their new father. And that's how it happens in Short Creek. That's how it's done. Since that time, it was kind of a test for Warren to make sure that everybody was behind him as the prophet of the church. And that anybody that wasn't was going to have to pay the consequences. And that was his way of doing it.
And this continued to happen, where women and children were reassigned again, and then reassigned again. So by the time the raid in Texas happened, and you probably saw that on the news several years ago, when these children were asked the most simple question, who is your mother and who is your father? They didn't know how to answer that. They had gone from one family, say, with 6 moms, and this is our dad, and our last name's Barlow. Now they're over in another family, and they're in Jessup, and they have like 10 more moms. And so these kids they're lost. Who's there to protect them? And that just places them at all kinds of risk for other abuse within the community and in their homes. So this is just a little bit of data. I created these charts, and it compares Utah and Arizona, the general population, with Colorado City, Arizona, and Hilldale, Utah, the polygamous town. And you can see that the age is much younger in Colorado City and Hilldale. And this is in your handouts too, so if you can't see it up here, you'll get it in your handouts. But the age of children, much younger in the polygamous community than the general population. You may guess that. Education, much lower. Okay. Incomes, again, let's see, what is this saying now? Incomes are much lower. So this is just, you can see how it's a different type of population. But this is really disturbing. This gets people really upset when you find out that your tax-paying money is going to support this criminal behavior that's exploiting children and trafficking them throughout the western United States. This is 1 year's government funding that went in to support polygamy. And this was between the year 2002 and 2003. $8 million went into just Colorado City and Hilldale in welfare. $2.3 million in food stamps. Kids didn't ever even know what real money looked like. They go to the grocery store, everyone's using food stamps. $5 million in health care. They get on Medicaid and WIC and Baby Your Baby. I mean, we want children to have prenatal care and we want them to have health care, but when they're just producing so recklessly, you're paying for it. There was also like $660,000 that was funneled in rural grants. They're very good writing grants and getting more money and sending it straight to Warren Jeffs in
Such
Texas.
as Homeland Security grants. They are in the top 3 behind Phoenix and I believe Tucson in Homeland Security grants. And we're talking night vision goggles,
Surveillance equipment, all of it.
I mean, all kinds of things like that. Police training, SWAT training for their local church-run marshals in town. Every kind of training they can get, they get it.
And when they first got Homeland Security funds from the Bush administration, he was called into question. And he's like, well, we can't discriminate by religion. This isn't even a border city or a town.